All right, so when we see this graphic, right, when you look at this, when you hear the thing, when you hear the phrase like raise a white flag or wave the white flag, what is that meant to signal? Surrender, right? But here's the deal. So we know that. We know that raising the white flag or waving the white flag, that's meant to signal surrender. But what we may not know is where that whole thing came from, right? How it became that signal that was meant to intend surrender, or why in the world is it a white flag, right? So the internet and ChatGPT know the answer to all of those questions, right? So here's where it is, right? The white flag goes all the way back to I'm not this smart, right? So just know that, right? I'm not, like I like books with pictures. So when I start talking about 206 BC, that ain't me, right? That's the internet. So, but this is what it says. The white flag goes all the way back to 206 BC to the Han Dynasty in China. They're the first ones who have ever been recorded when it comes to using a piece of white cloth as a means of signaling from one army to another that they want to request a truce. We want a truce. We see it show up again in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire used white flags, or in some cases, they would paint their shields white, and they would raise them up over a battle. And again, they're asking for mercy. They're requesting negotiations. Waving the white flag became even more prevalent, right, during medieval times in Europe, right? It was a signal of surrender that meant one side was choosing to yield to the other side instead of just fighting to the death. It's like we want to yield to the other side. The reason that it's a white flag is because a white flag stands out against the backdrop of war. A white flag stands out against the backdrop on the battlefield. So it really doesn't matter what kind of conditions you're in. A white flag is something that is intended and meant to be noticeable in the midst of chaos. It's meant to grab your attention. Why? So that the fighting stops quickly. That the fighting does not go on any longer, not 1 second longer than it has to. In fact, here's what I learned. In 1899, during the Geneva Conventions, that's when waving a white flag was legally codified as a protective sign for negotiation and surrendering parties. It's now actually an internationally recognized symbol that's protected under the laws of war. And here's what that law states. Combatants displaying a white flag should not be attacked, as they are signaling their intent to cease hostilities. They're yielding to an opposing force. They're requesting a temporary halt in fighting to negotiate terms to ultimately end the conflict altogether. And they're communicating, get this, peaceful intent in an otherwise hostile environment. So let me just tell you, if you're new to Adventure, one of the ways we take notes is we just grab screenshots. We keep your phone out, you take pictures of the screen. You're going to need that today, right? And if you're a note taker, lace them up, right? There's a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about today. Like, just go ahead and start, like, loosening. You may have to go ambidextrous. You may have to go to your non-dominant, right? We're going to be taking lots of notes today, and I'm not saying this because I feel like I'm important. It's what we have to talk about over the next handful of weeks is so important. Don't miss stuff. Don't think, oh, yeah, I'll remember that. Because if you're anything like me, you think, oh, yeah, I'll remember, I won't forget that. And then you go out and you start realizing, oh, here's the things I got to do the rest of the day, and whatever it was you wanted to remember is already gone. So grab a screenshot or take notes in a journal, whatever you're doing. So one of the authors that I read this week said this. What's especially interesting is that the white flag represents kind of a paradox. In the heat of violence, it's a sign of vulnerability, but not one of weakness. The white flag carries immense strength, meaning it's signaling life over death and negotiation over annihilation. That's different, right, than the way we think of a white flag, the way we think of surrender. In our minds, surrender and loss go hand in hand. If I surrender, it meant I lost and you won. It meant that this side lost, that this side beat the other side, right? Like, here are the losers, here's the winner. But in reality, surrender is actually intended to prevent loss from happening entirely. It's not a loss. It's designed to prevent loss from ever happening. It says this, let's end this now before it crosses a line, before it goes any further, before someone gets hurt, before we start taking casualties. Let's stop. Let's pause. Let's negotiate before we annihilate. Now, you guys know this. We're not really talking about the history of warfare, Battlefield Texas. You're smart people. You can tell by the series name and the graphic. We're talking about everything that happens in our homes and really what this word home represents. Because a house is not necessarily a home, right? A house is just a building. But a house becomes a home when we start to live in it. That's when a house becomes a home. See, our homes, they're more than just walls and doors and windows and roofs. Our homes essentially become tangible symbols, right, that begin to kind of represent our lives to some extent. As we build our homes, we build our lives. As we make our homes our own, they begin to reflect our lives. Again, if you've ever built a house or you've ever bought a house, right, you go into a house, they've moved out of that, they've taken all their stuff with them. Like you don't buy a house, walk into a house that maybe someone built and someone owned before you, and like all their stuff is there, and all your job is you're just gonna take up their lives wherever they left off. Right? That's not how houses work. You don't walk into that house and go, well, I guess we're the Millers, right? No, you go into a house that's kind of a blank slate, and as you move your stuff in, that house begins to reflect who you are. For many of us, building our homes reflects how we're building our hopes and dreams. For others, maybe our homes reflect something a little less than a hope, less than a dream. Instead, it feels like a nightmare. We're not trying to build our home, we're trying to survive it. But no matter where you fall in that range, right, hopes and dreams or surviving what feels like a nightmare, or anywhere in between, right? The home front is an active and oftentimes kinetic battlefield in our lives. We are fighting to keep peace. We are fighting to bring stability. It's a battlefield. Pat Benatar said it best. Love is a battlefield, right? But when it comes to our marriages, our families, our kids, our parenting, our relationships, and the legacy that we hope to leave behind for future generations, here's the truth, church, and we need to get our heads around this. There are enemies, both foreign and domestic. There are threats, internal and external. And there is a critical need in your home for both protection and provision. And all of this needs to be understood and dealt with if we want to win the most important battles in our lives where they matter the most. Because let's be real, right? Our lives operate on multiple fronts all the time. I mean, sometimes my life resembles and feels more like World War III. Like there's fighting everywhere. Sometimes I tell people it's like I'm less of a pastor and I'm more of a firefighter, right? I feel like I'm running into things that are burning down all the time, right? There's the work front. There's our jobs, what pays the bills, right? That feels like a battle sometimes. It's a battlefront. We got to tend to that. There's the school front. Students, we're in school, right? That feels like a battle sometimes. There's the social front, all of our friendships and relationships. How do we keep those things up? How do we maintain them? How do we keep them healthy? There's the cultural front, which feels more and more and more like a fight every day. There's the financial front. And I don't know about you, but the financial front to me is one of the ones that stresses me out the most. Are we going to have enough at the end of the month to put food on the table? Are we going to have enough to take care of our medical? Are we going to have enough to make sure that the lights stay? Are we going to have enough to provide a future for our family? That feels like a battle. There's no shortage of active and kinetic fronts in our lives. The issue is this: it's really easy to shift our resources towards all of the fighting on all of these different fronts, and without really knowing it, and even without intending to, what happens is we leave the home front unguarded. We leave the home front unprovided for. We leave the home front unprotected. And so here's what happens. The most important front in our lives is typically the one that's left most vulnerable. But let me ask this question, and this is really the question we're going to explore for the next handful of weeks together. What if winning the most important battles that matter the most on one of the most important fronts, the home front, what if they're not won by gaining more control, but by giving up control? What if the war on the home front isn't won through domination, but instead is won through submission? What if the battle on the home front is not won through force and resistance, but through willing acceptance? And here's what I'm asking. What if victory on the home front was found in and came through the act of surrender? What if that's where we found victory? What if maybe for some of us, we've been fighting this battle the wrong way the whole time? And just taking laps around the battlefield going, why hasn't this stopped? Why does this still feel like a fight? Which again, I need us to understand something, right? When we talk about surrender, it's not about weakness or loss, but rather it's actually a show of strength. Surrender on the home front sounds like this, right? Take a picture of this. In my home, I choose life over death. In my home, I choose negotiation over annihilation. In my home, I choose communication over isolation. My aim in my home is to prevent loss within my home from happening entirely. And so let me ask this question. What if in our marriages, our parenting, our relationships on the home front, we raised up a symbol that stood out against the backdrop of chaos that signaled an end to all the fighting? And instead, the pursuit of peaceful living. What if we raise that high enough for people to see? We got to stop fighting before we take any more losses. Would things change in your life? Would things look different? What would change in your life? What would change in your marriage? What would change in your relationship with your kids if instead of domination and annihilation, it was communication? What would change? See, whether you're married or single, whether you're younger or older, kids, no kids, empty nesters, there's something in this series for everyone. From our students all the way up to the oldest folks in our church, there's something for everyone here, the more experienced people in our church, right? Because here's the deal. Regardless of your age, your marital status, your parental status, your relationship status, we all have a home front. Every single one of us has a home front in our lives that needs to be protected, that needs to be provided for. And due to all of the other fronts and fights that we're engaged in, the home front is usually the one that gets left most exposed. And it's also the front where the losses and casualties that we take are the hardest to overcome. And the reality is we know that to be true. Because some of us, we are that loss. Some of us, we were that casualty. Some of us, we're still trying to get over the loss that we're grieving. The casualty, the empty seat. We're still trying to get over that, and we can't seem to get past it. So what if we change the whole way we go at this? Grab your Bibles, open up to Mark chapter 12. So Mark, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, second book in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the biographies of Jesus. They tell Jesus' story. So Mark, second book in the New Testament, here's what it says. Mark chapter 12, verse 29. It says this: Jesus just gets asked. Like Jesus is asked by like a religious law scholar, right? So like a religious lawyer asks Jesus, what's the most important thing in all of the Bible? Like, what's the most important thing that God ever said to do? Like, Jesus, what matters the most? And maybe you've asked those questions too. I know I have. Like, Jesus, like, there's a lot of stuff in here. Like, if we could just kind of boil it all down to one thing, like, what would that be? Like, what's the most important thing for me to do? What do I need to do? Who do I need to be? Just break it down for me. He's asking Jesus to do the same thing. Jesus, break it down. Like, take all this stuff and can we just boil it down to maybe one thing? What's the most important thing to do that God's ever asked us to do? What's the most important command? And here's how Jesus answers. He says, the most important is this. And he says, listen up. Pay attention. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And then I'm sure as that guy's standing there, if we were standing there, we'd go, oh, okay, cool, thanks, got it. And then Jesus goes, and the second is, right? Love your neighbor as you see. Jesus always gives you a bonus, right? It's like, well, I'll give you the most important, right? But here's a bonus one, right? The second one is love your neighbor as yourself. And then he connects them together. He says, there's no other command, not commands. There's no other command greater than these. They go together. The love that we have for God should reflect the love we have for others, right? So I want to unpack this, right? So Jesus gets asked a super loaded question. And Jesus says, actually, the most important thing is not one thing, it's actually three things when you really start to unpack this. The first is recognize who God is. And when I say recognize who he is, I'm talking about his identity and his character. And then from that place of recognizing who God is, right, who he is to you, who you are to him, from that place, you can now then respond to God. You can respond to who he is. You can then respond to his identity and character, who he is to you and who we are to him, with love. That's the first thing. Recognize who God is, his identity and character. Recognize who you are to him, who he is to you. Respond with love. Jesus says this: love is the only fitting response to who God is. Basically, that's how you can sum that up. Love is the only fitting response to who God is, who he is to us, and who we are to him. That is the only way we could respond. Now, the word love that's used in the Bible means and represents something entirely different than what it means and represents to us now in 2025. See, in both the Hebrew and the Greek culture, there were several different words used for love that all meant and pointed to and implied and represented something different about love, like a different aspect of what love was and how love works. See, our word for love is kind of a junk drawer word that we throw a lot of things into. But they had different words for love that meant and pointed to and implied different things. In this case, the word for love that Jesus uses to describe our response to who God is, who we are to him, who he is to us, is not an emotion or a feeling word. This isn't about feeling all lovey-dovey towards God. It's not all about the warm fuzzies. It's not a romantic feeling. It's an action word. And it literally means this: much beloved, or to love much, or to love dearly. This word for love that Jesus uses doesn't point to what love is or what love feels, but rather it points to what love does. And that's this: love is an active expression of choice based in who you are. It's an active expression of choice that's based in your identity and character, that then is directed at someone because of who they are to you and because of who you are to them. So when Jesus says, love the Lord your God, he says, I choose, which is what love does, to welcome you. I choose, that's what love does, to be fond of you. I choose to hold you as beloved over all things. I choose to love you deeply and authentically because this is the kind of person that I am. The kind of, my identity and my character, they get reflected, right, and represented in the way that I love. The kind of person I am is someone who loves. I choose this. So it comes from my identity and my character, right, but it's directed at you because of who you are to me and because of who I am to you, right? So the first thing Jesus says is this: recognize that God is God, right? That's his identity. God is God. And also understand what kind of God he is. That's his character. When Jesus says that listen up, right? God is the Lord and he is one, and that we are to love him. What Jesus is saying is this: God is unlike anyone or anything else. And the only fitting response to who he is to us, and who we are to him, is to actively choose. That's what love does. To love him unlike anything or anyone else, because he chooses, that's what love does, to love us unlike anything or anyone else. And I love this. One of my favorite books by one of my favorite authors, Dallas Willard, right? It's called Renovation of the Heart. And one of the reasons I love this book is right on the cover is a picture of a white flag. Dallas Willard talks about the fact that when it comes to love and choosing love and this verb form of love, that actually we use three different things, right? We use vision to see it clearly. We use intention, right? That's our purpose. We pursue it passionately. And then we have our means, right? That's what we invest in it radically. Like, this is what it looks like. And actually this word vim, comes from a Latin word that means enthusiasm, energy, force, and power. So vision, intention, and means, look at it like this. This is what you use to display or not display the enthusiasm, energy, force, and power of your love. These are the resources, right, that we have available to us to reflect our identity and character in the way that we love. Vision, see it clearly. Get a vision for. Picture it in your mind. What love can look like. Intention. Decide to pursue it passionately, not just halfway in. Pursue it passionately. And then means, that's what we have, our time, our energy, our money, our attention. Invest it in attaining whatever this is, that love. Invest it radically. Hold nothing back. This is what we use to love. This is what's available to us to love. But if you don't have a picture of it, then you're not going to have intentions for it, and you're not going to invest any means in it. If you can't see it clearly, right, then you're not going to be motivated to do anything about it. And you're going to hold more back for yourself. That's why this stuff matters. See, we have to see and get a picture clearly of who God is. God is one of one. There is no one or nothing else like him. He gives a love to us that is one of one. That's that vision. See God for who he is and the kind of love that he offers to you. And because of who he is and the kind of love that he offers to us, he gets a love that is unlike any other. It's one of one from us. That's our intention. We're using our intention because we intend to passionately pursue God. Why? Because he does the same for us. Well, how do we love like that? Through our means, what we have to invest. The radical surrender of all of our means. Jesus says the only fitting love for God is to invest and surrender love with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, and all of your strength. The word all is the Greek word halos. And it means this, it means fully permeated, completely saturated, wholly and throughout. Meaning this, when it comes to our love and our means that we invest, right, there is no part untouched. There is nothing held back. There is no space left empty. There is no part left out. In other words, a one-on-one love is choosing to fully surrender and hold no part of your life or your love back from God. That's what it means. Where does that full surrender take place? In our hearts and our souls and our minds and through our strength. Are you tracking? Yeah? Thumbs up? Okay, good. This is heady. I just want to make sure. Like, I was kind of drooling in my office as I was studying this. Right? I just want to make sure we're all tracking. So right? So these different parts of who we are, these different parts of who we are that Jesus talks about, they have a deeper and more significant meaning than just like organs in our chests and brains in our skulls and muscles in our bodies, right? The heart, back in Jesus' day, literally pointed to our identity, our will, and our character. It's the center of what makes us who we are. One author I read this week said it like this: our heart is our chooser. Our heart determines the kind of force that our lives will exert on the world around us through our will. Our heart is our chooser. It determines, right, the kind of force that our lives will exert on the world around us through our will. Who we are, our identity and character, gets revealed and reflected in what we choose to do. That's our force of will when we believe we've been given the opportunity. That's our character. Our character and identity gets revealed in what we choose to do when we believe we're given the opportunity. Hypothetical, totally hypothetical situation, okay? Let me just, again, hypothetical, just for an example. Christy asked me to run an errand or two to help her and our family out, right? Hypothetical. I believe that I have the opportunity to do what I want to do. So instead of running those errands, I choose to go see a movie. The result is, through the way I chose to love, what gets revealed about my identity and character is Brad's a selfish husband because he chose to go see a movie. That's why he used his force of will instead of helping his wife. Completely hypothetical, not real, right? But when it comes to surrendered love, right, the heart chooses and decides what and how and to whom we will surrender, which reveals who we are. It reveals our identity and our character. Why? Through our force of will, through our choice. That gets expressed through what we choose to do when we're given the opportunity. Jesus talks about this in Luke chapter 6. He says, a good person, someone with good character and identity, will produce good. That's the force of will exerted on their world through the choices they make. Out of the good stored up where? In their heart. What's the heart? The heart's our chooser. So because the heart's good, it's going to choose good things. But the evil person, he says, that's their evil character and identity, will produce evil. They choose to exert evil out of the evil stored up where? Our hearts, because that's the chooser that reveals our identity and our character. Everything that happens out here comes from in here. Character and identity get revealed through your force of will, what you choose to do when you believe you've been given the opportunity to do it. So that's our hearts, all right? Our minds point to our thoughts, our feelings, and our emotions. It's the filter through which we determine reality, right? Our minds are what help us discern what we believe to be real or fake, true or false. Our thoughts inform us, but they're also informed by our feelings and our emotions. What I think about someone or something shapes how I feel towards them and how I feel about them. And the flip of that is also true. How I feel about someone will shape and inform what I think about them. So our thoughts, right, are informed by our feelings. And our thoughts also help to form our feelings and our emotions. Here's why this whole thing matters, right? Here's what Paul says in Romans chapter 12. He says, do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Why? So that then you can discern reality. What's real, that's good and pleasing, and the perfect will of God. The mind is the center of transformation or conformity. That's where transformation or conformity take place in our minds. I've said this in here before, but I think it bears repeating, right? When it comes to our minds, there's no such thing as neutral ground, right? Our minds are either being conformed to the rhythms and patterns of an earthly and worldly reality, or they're being transformed to the rhythms and patterns of a kingdom and heavenly reality. There's no neutral ground. And here's why this matters. People, we are story-formed creatures. We use stories to help us make sense of what's happening around us. We use narratives. These are stories that we tell ourselves to help us make sense of reality. Those are personal judgments, right? What I see happening, there's a story I tell myself, and that's a personal judgment I have about whatever's happening in that moment. Is it real? Is it fake? Is it true? Is it false? Is it good? Is it evil? So here's what that means. Depending on the state and status of our minds, if they're being conformed to the rhythms and patterns of this world or transformed into the rhythms and patterns of God's kingdom, we are either discerning and deciphering reality, which is what's true, what's real, what's fake, or what's false, through a worldly narrative or a kingdom narrative. You're discerning reality based on what God says is true or what the world says is true. Now think about that and apply that to your marriage, to parenting, to dating relationships, to sexuality, to another person. You're discerning reality. What's true based on what God says or what the world says. Reality is either being conformed or transformed through a worldly story that we tell ourselves or a heavenly story that's told by God, spoken into us through His Word. Which means this, church, your world may be falling apart, but yet you can see what's happening in your life through the lens of God's reality. So even though my world is falling apart, in the eyes of God, I am still His son. He still loves me. Both of those things can be true. I can be in conflict. It can feel like World War III in my life. I can feel like I'm losing, and yet still in the eyes of God, I'm still His son. So while the truth that the world wants me to believe is, Brad, you're a loser, that could be the story I tell myself that defines my reality. Or I can listen to God's story. He says, you're my son and I love you. I told you in this world you would have trouble, but take heart because I've overcome the world. So the reason we're focusing in on our heart and mind this week is because surrender and transformation really only work from the inside out, not the outside in, right? The outside in is just behavior modification. The outside in is just trying harder. How many of us have said that? I just need to try harder. If I could just try harder to fix my marriage, maybe it'll work. If I could just try harder to speak into my kids, then maybe they'll listen. Where does that get us? Worn out, resentful, angry, hurt. And so it's not about trying, it's about training. So when it comes to surrender, this internal territory of our hearts and minds is what we have the hardest time giving up and handing over, right? Our hearts and minds also are what are most easily infiltrated by the world's reality, the world's narratives, the lies that Satan would use to twist the way we see things. We resist giving up control over our hearts because I want to define my own identity. I don't want anybody else to get to say who I am. I want to say who I am. I want to decide where and when and how and for who I exert the force of my will. I want to decide that. I should have a say in how my life is run. And in the end, what could be a source of peace through surrender becomes a generator of conflict. The thing that was meant to choose love is now choosing war. One author I read said this: "Thy kingdom come means my kingdom must go. Thy will be done means my will must be undone on earth in my life as it is in heaven in God's kingdom." That means that the central territory of my identity and my character and my will have been surrendered, and now they belong to God. Which means this: your heart and your mind doesn't belong to you anymore, they're now His. That's His territory, not yours. When it comes to our minds, we resist giving up control over deciding and defining and deciphering our own reality. That doesn't feel safe, does it? It doesn't feel safe to give up control in what I choose to believe is real or fake or good or bad. I should be able to do that. I don't want to give up control of that. What if I'm led down the wrong path? But here's what happens. In the end, we cling to and we are formed by lies and false narratives. In trying to own that for ourselves, we try to bend our reality around us through the justification of our own actions. And just if you're wondering, like, well, what does it mean to justify? It's just as if I. You can say, well, it's not like I killed anyone. That's justification. It's just as if you did, right? We tell ourselves these believable stories about what we think is real. Why? To soothe or even to block our feelings and our emotions. I don't want to feel that right now, so I'm going to shove it down. Eventually what happens is it comes out sideways. Surrendering the territory of our minds means that we yield the right to define reality on our own terms, and instead we let the truth of God's word and the presence of the Holy Spirit retrain us in the way that we think. And so what that does is it actually roots our emotions and our feelings in truth, what's actually real. Another author I read said this: "Feelings and emotions make good servants but horrible masters. They're great navigators, but they're terrible drivers." They just recently changed the driving age law in Kentucky, which means my 13-year-old is about a year and a half away from this. Would you put your 13-year-old behind the wheel of your car and just say, "Let's go down the Watterson"? No way. Why? Because he's 13. He's emotional, right? He's impulsive. He's reactive. So are your emotions and feelings. They're impulsive and they're reactive when they're not rooted in truth. You wouldn't put your 13-year-old behind the wheel and say, "Let's tackle the Gene Snyder today." No, you would get, "Listen, I got to do this." Why? Because I got some experience here. Because I've got some experience here, can see what's really happening and I know what to do. And here's what I want to do. Here's kind of how I want to land this whole thing today, right? I want to show you what I mean about this surrender, right? How this all ties into the home front. The reality that we can't win the battles that happen on the home front until we surrender what's happening in our hearts and minds. I want to show you what I mean by reading one of the most controversial and conflict-inducing sections of Scripture in all of the Bible, right? You'll see that what I mean, right? You'll see that when we wave the white flag of surrender, it actually brings abundant life into the home and it ends hostilities. So I'm like, let's not beat around the bush. Let's just go right for it, right? Let's just get into it. Ephesians 5:21 through 33 says this: "Submit," which means surrender, "to one another out of reverence because you're surrendered to Christ." Pause here, right? This goes back to that Mark 12 passage we just read. Because Jesus is who he is, and because Jesus can do and has done that which is unlike any other, he overcame death. He was executed publicly, and it didn't work. Because he's able to do that, nobody else can do that. The only fitting response to someone like that is to surrender to him. And because you've surrendered to him, you can also surrender to one another. We've mutually given our lives to Jesus. We mutually surrender our ways for his ways, his life, our lives for his life. We offer our lives, right? We offer his ways through surrender to one another. See, if I've given my life to Jesus to take his life on, if I've given my ways to Jesus to take his ways on, if I've surrendered my ways and my life to Jesus, I can also offer that to you. I can offer you Jesus' ways and Jesus' life, and you can offer that to me. It's meant to be given to one another. That's what mutual surrender is. Which I'll just tell you, this verse is the one that's most often left out. People skip over the one that's all about mutual surrender to get into where they can start pointing fingers at one another. All right? So, ground rules before we do this. If you're sitting next to or near your spouse, keep your hands to yourself, right? Keep your eyes forward and do not be on guard of making passive aggressive noises stuff like that, okay? Here's what it says. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do the Lord. Now, this is a different word for submit than the one we just read. The word for mutual submission, our men and women, right, our mutual submission to Jesus is actually a military term that means to arrange yourself under someone's command. That's not this word for submit. This word for submit or surrender is a relationship word that means this: surrender, connection without condition. Offer connection without conditions. Surrender your conditions to offer connection, which is why Paul says, do this in the same way you do it to Jesus. In the same way that you receive relational connection with God without condition through Jesus, wives, give that same kind of relational connection without condition that you receive from Jesus to your husband. That's how this is supposed to work. It's not a military term, it's a relationship term. And then Paul clarifies. He says, for the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, again, we read this through the lens of our kind of modern world. We think head of the company, head of the table, chairman of the board, who's in charge. That's not what this word means. This word head is not about being in charge or authority. It's about this. It means being the provider and protector of life. If you cut off the head, what dies? The body. It's literally referring to the thing that sits on our shoulders, not who sits at the head of the table, not who's on top of the org chart, not who's in charge. In fact, this word in Hebrew refers to the headwaters of a river. It's the source and origin of life. The word for head in Greek means that which is most easily taken a hold of, that which can be grabbed. Right? Someone who wants to protect their authority and their power, they make themselves unapproachable. But here, what Paul is saying is, husbands, you have to be the most approachable and accessible person for your wife. You are not too good for her. Being the head is not about sitting in authority. It's about providing and protecting life through surrender and sacrifice and service. Paul goes on, he says, now as the church submits, as it offers connection without condition to Christ, so wives, you should submit, offer connection without condition to your husbands in everything. Surrender your conditions to more fully offer connection. Now, let me offer a caveat here. Wives, this is coming through the lens of mutual submission, right? This is not separate or apart from what Paul is getting ready to say, and he's quoting Jesus, right? This is not separate from what he's challenging husbands to do. So this is not to say, hey, you need to surrender all of your conditions to offer connection in an abusive relationship. That's not what it's saying. That's not what this is saying. You need to surrender all of your conditions inside of a relationship that's unfaithful. That's not what this is saying. In fact, those are really the only two grounds that Jesus allows when it comes to ending a marriage: abuse and unfaithfulness. So it's not saying you have to offer this and receive pain in return. That's not what this is saying, right? This comes through the lens of mutual submission, and it's connected to what Paul's getting ready to say to the dudes, all right? So now it's your turn, fellas, buckle up, right? Husbands, he says, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, to make her unlike anything or anyone, cleansing her by washing her with the water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Man, this is the same word for love that we read in Mark 12. This is not about what love feels. It's not about what love is, but it's about what love does. Men, what he's saying is love is an active expression of choice. Love is the force of your will that reflects your character and your identity. Jesus says to his disciples, people will know who you are by what? Your love, the way you love one another. Jesus says that the world will be able to tell who you are. Your identity and your character will be reflected by the way you love. Men, love is an active expression of choice. It is the force of your will that reflects your identity and your character. Because of who you are, men, as a son of God, because your wife is a daughter of God, because of who she is to you as your wife, and because of who you are to her as her husband, men, choose to be the kind of man, that's what love does, that welcomes her, that is fond of her, that holds your wife as beloved over all things. Choose to be the kind of man, that's what love does, that loves her deeply and authentically by being the kind of man who surrenders yourself fully for her in order to provide her with the kind of life that Jesus desires. Paul says, in this same way, husbands, you ought to choose to love your wives as your own body. Choose to love your wife as you would choose to love your own body. He says, he who chooses his wife chooses himself. But look who gets chosen first. It's the surrender of self to put your wife first that also reflects who you are as a man. He chooses to love his wife, and by choosing to love his wife, he actually does good for himself. By choosing to strengthen, provide, and protect his wife, he's actually making himself stronger. After all, he says, no one ever hated their own body, but they fed it. They provided for it. They care for it. They protect it, just as Christ provides and protects the church, for we are members of his body. For this reason, quoting Genesis, quoting God, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, he says. I'm talking about Christ and the church, but I'm also talking about your marriages. It reflects the gospel. He's saying, men, choose to provide for and protect your wives in the same way that you would choose to provide for and protect yourself. And then he says this, the wife must respect, be in awe of her husband. Fellas, I'll give you a tip, right? If you want your wife to be in awe of you, this is what it takes. If you want your wife to respect you, to honor you, then become someone who is respectable and honorable. If you're going, Brad, I'm just not getting the respect or the honor I deserve in my house. I would ask you this, are you respectable and are you honorable? Brad, I just want my wife to be in awe of me. Why? What are you doing? How are you actively expressing that force of will? How are you choosing to show her who you are? If she's not in awe, it means she's got a different reflection. She's seeing something that is not worthy of awe. And here's the deal. These verses have been weaponized and they've caused conflict for years. But I want you to notice what happens when we wave the white flag of surrender and we yield to Jesus and one another. When you listen to this, right? What happens in a marriage where mutual surrender to Jesus takes place and then mutual surrender to one another takes place, does this not sound like a 1,000% better way to live in marriage? At the center of this kind of marriage lies redemptive sacrifice. that renews the heart and mind and transforms the husband and wife from the inside out. Redemptive surrender is letting go of something in order to receive something better. It's like this, and I can't think of any better like other definition or way of describing it. It's like the redemption counter at Chuck E. Cheese, right? Where after spending hours on skee ball and racking up thousands of tickets, right? You've invested your means, you had a vision for what you wanted, right? I walked into Chuck E. Cheese and I finally want to get the Nintendo, right? That's up there. How many tickets does it cost? It costs 10,000 tickets, right? So again, my initiative, right? My intention in that moment is I'm going to win that thing. So I'm going to use all my means, all my skill with skee ball to get 10,000 tickets so I can get that, right? That's what it is. And I go and I take those tickets and I hand them in, and I get something better. That's what redemptive sacrifice is. It's letting go of something so that you can take a hold of something better. Wives, redemptive surrender, redemptively surrendering, right? Conditions to offer connection and become people who receive authentic love from their husbands. Husbands, redemptively surrender power and privilege to sacrificially serve and protect and provide and become the kind of man who can give authentic love to your wife. Men, when you become that kind of man who can offer and give authentic love to your wife, she will receive it without conditions. And then you will receive that connection that you've been looking for. If you want to be respected and honored, then be someone respectable and honorable. Through mutual surrender, church, our marriages begin to profoundly and mysteriously reflect the gospel of Jesus to everyone, but especially to those who live on our home front. Which means this, as our marriages transform, as we train in this kind of submission and surrender, our marriages become an image of the gospel to our kids. Our kids see Jesus at work within us. Our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, they begin to see the gospel. Why? Because instead of trying to take territory, we decided to wave the white flag. I choose life over death. I choose negotiation over annihilation. I choose communication over isolation. And I want to get a picture of it. I want to passionately pursue it. And I want to throw everything I've got into it. I'm going to push all my chips to the center when it comes to surrender. This is what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks, right? But there is no greater picture of this than when Jesus gave up his life. He laid down his life for us. Jesus surrendered. Jesus practiced redemptive surrender. He let go of his life so that he could take hold of us and so that we could take hold of him. And so here in just a second, that's exactly what we're going to celebrate together. We're going to celebrate communion. And in communion, there's a little cup of grape juice and there's a little piece of bread. That juice represents the blood of Jesus that was shed for you to pay for your sins. That bread represents the body of Jesus that was broken for you, that left death in the grave so that he could offer you life. Jesus practiced redemptive surrender. He let go of his life so he could take hold of you, so that you could take hold of him. He's not asking us to do, get this, church, please hear this. Jesus is not asking you to do something in your homes, in your marriages, and in your relationships that he has not already done himself. Leaders go first. Jesus went first. And then he says to us, follow me. I'm going to pray for us, and in this time as we take communion, I would just ask you what needs to be surrendered? What within your heart and your mind need to be surrendered? What about your choices need to be surrendered? What about how you discern and decipher reality, what's real or fake, needs to be surrendered? What do you need to let go of today, maybe that you've been holding on to for a really long time, so that you can finally receive something from God? I'm letting go of the narrative that tells me I'm a screw up, I'm a failure, I'm damaged goods, I'm too broken to fix. Why? So that I can receive from God that in my eyes, you're beautiful. In my eyes, you're worth it all. I'm going to surrender that narrative that someone told me that says, you're worthless. You have no value. You have no meaning. You have no purpose. So that I can receive from God in my eyes. I gave everything for you. In my eyes, there is no price tag that we can put on your life. You are priceless. This is the time to let it go. Wave the white flag before the fighting gets worse. Cease hostilities before they go too far.